The cafeteria buzzed with the usual midday chaos. Trays clattering, kids laughing, lunch monitors shouting over the hum to keep the noise down. Amidst all of it, my daughter sat quietly at the far end of the room, right by the wall where the sunlight from the windows just barely kissed the tiled floor. Her wheelchair was parked beside the table, her favorite purple lunchbox open in front of her, filled with the only meal she ever really looked forward to, the grilled cheese sandwich I made with heart-shaped cutters, apple slices arranged like a smiley face, and a tiny note that said, "You're braver than you believe." She didn't say much, she never did, but her eyes lit up when she read those notes. Today should have been no different. But then came her, Karen, clacking heels on polished tile, sunglasses still perched on her head like a crown, and that saccharine smile twisted into something smug. She wasn't supposed to be here, she wasn't a teacher, not even a volunteer today, but being the HOA board president somehow made her feel like she owned more than just the sidewalks and fences. Behind her trailed two other women, equally overdressed, equally smug, their bracelets jingling like warning bells. They strolled past table after table like royalty, pausing to laugh at things no one else found funny. And then they saw my daughter. Karen's voice cut through the noise like a knife. Well, look at this little pity party. The women chuckled. My daughter froze, instinctively pulling her tray closer, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. Karen leaned down, her perfume thick and suffocating, and stared straight at the food like it had insulted her. "What's this? A gourmet meal for a special little snowflake?" She mocked, glancing sideways at her friends, who burst out laughing. My daughter tried to say something, maybe to explain the sandwich or the note, but the words got stuck behind her fear. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. That's when Karen reached down with those perfectly manicured fingers and grabbed the entire tray. My daughter's hands jerked upward, not fast enough, and her eyes widened in panic. "Let's just clean up this mess, shall we?" Karen said sweetly. And just like that, she walked over to the trash can, heels echoing, each step a drumbeat of disbelief, and dumped the entire meal in. Apple slices, sandwich, juice box, note, gone. The cafeteria went quiet for a moment, not because anyone stood up for her, but because even the cruelty was so sharp, so casual, it stunned the kids around her. Then came the laughter. Karen's friends cackled like they just pulled off a harmless prank, like they were back in high school, and my daughter was just the punchline of the day. I wasn't there. I didn't see it live, but I saw the footage later. Security footage the school didn't want to show me until I threatened legal action. And I watched horrified as my daughter sat completely still. Her hands stayed hovering where the tray had been, like she was still trying to believe it was real. Her shoulders trembled, and then her chin slowly dropped to her chest, her breath catching, lips pressed tight together to keep from crying in front of them. The tray was gone. Her lunch was gone. Her dignity, too. And the worst part? Karen just walked away, like she had done something noble, like taking food from a disabled child was somehow her duty as self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood. I can't even begin to explain what it feels like to watch your child be publicly humiliated, not for anything she did, but just for existing differently. I remember pausing the footage at the exact moment her face collapsed, that moment where she stopped being a little girl looking forward to lunch and became a target, a lesson, a victim. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the moment everything changed. My daughter wasn't just bullied. She was taught by the adults in her life, the ones in power, the ones who should have protected her, that her needs didn't matter, that her space wasn't welcome, that her very presence made someone uncomfortable enough to destroy her meal for sport. And no one, not a single teacher, not a lunch monitor, not even another student, stood up to stop it. That silence was louder than Karen's laughter. I sat there that night with her untouched lunchbox in my lap. The apple slices had browned, the sandwich had gone cold, and the note was crumpled and soggy from juice. My daughter didn't eat dinner. She just stared out the window and said she didn't feel hungry. But I knew better. She was hungry, not for food, but for safety, for dignity, for someone to say, "What happened to you wasn't okay." That moment, frozen in time, replayed in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. It didn't just shatter her, it shattered me. Because if the people in charge could laugh while humiliating a disabled child and walk away without consequence, then what hope was left for the rest of us? This was more than just a lunch. It was a message, a cruel one. And I was going to make sure the world heard our version of it, because silence might have protected Karen, but it was never going to protect my daughter again. We weren't looking for perfection, just peace. A simple, quiet life where our daughter could be herself without judgment or pity. That's all we ever wanted. After years of hospitals, therapy sessions, endless paperwork, and school meetings that always seemed more focused on what our daughter couldn't do rather than what she could, my wife and I made the decision to move. We needed a fresh start, a home where we weren't constantly explaining, defending, or begging for accommodations. Our daughter, Lily, was born with a neurological condition that affects her motor coordination and speech. She uses a wheelchair, but she's bright, deeply empathetic, and endlessly curious. She notices things most people miss: how the light falls on the leaves, how someone's voice quivers when they're trying not to cry. She feels everything, and she deserved a community that saw her heart before her chair. So, when we stumbled upon Willow Creek, a picture-perfect neighborhood just 30 minutes outside the city, we thought we had found it. The streets were clean, lined with dogwood trees and pastel-painted homes. The sidewalks were wide, the lawns manicured, and there was even a community park with a sensory garden. Best of all, the listings bragged about an active HOA that keeps our community safe, inclusive, and thriving. It felt like a promise. The move itself was a whirlwind. Boxes everywhere, furniture stacked like a game of Tetris, and Lily rolling excitedly through every room, claiming each one with her signature. "This will be my reading corner." She loved corners. She said they made her feel safe. We painted her room lavender, added glow-in-the-dark stars to her ceiling, and placed her books on low, accessible shelves so she could reach everyone without help. It was more than a new house. It was hope in drywall and carpet and freshly painted doors. A week after moving in, the HOA held a welcome brunch for new residents. We were touched. It was held in the community center, a cheerful building with high ceilings and bulletin boards covered in photos of kids' art, bake sales, and gardening tips. That was the first time we met Karen. She was impeccably dressed. Navy pantsuit, tasteful gold necklace, hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She greeted us with a bright, dazzling smile that felt like a practice performance. Her voice was high-pitched and controlled, like someone who spent a lot of time speaking in front of people. "Oh, you must be the Walkers. Welcome to Willow Creek. I'm Karen, head of the HOA, and always just a call away. If you need anything," she said, clutching our hands like we'd just closed a business deal. She crouched to Lily's eye level, smiled just enough to be polite, and said, "And what's your name, sweetheart?" Lily offered a soft smile and signed her name using her hands, her own way of communicating when words got stuck. Karen blinked. The smile faltered for a moment, and then she straightened up. "Isn't that just special?" she said, before gliding off to greet the next family. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe she was just surprised. Maybe she didn't know sign language. Maybe. Over the following weeks, we did our best to settle in. My wife joined the community gardening club, and I volunteered to help repair the swings at the park, which had been broken for months. Lily started at the local elementary school and was placed in an inclusive classroom. At first, everything seemed fine. The neighbors waved, smiled, sometimes dropped off muffins or offered help when they saw Lily struggling to open a mailbox. We went on evening strolls, letting Lily pick which direction we'd turn. The wind was kinder here, we thought. The world felt gentler. But slowly, small cracks began to show. We received a note in our mailbox one morning. "Please ensure your daughter's wheelchair doesn't block the sidewalk when she waits for the school bus." It was unsigned. Another time, Lily's raised garden bed, a small wooden box with tomatoes and herbs she adored, was accidentally removed during a neighborhood landscaping project. No warning. No apology. When we brought it up at the monthly HOA meeting, Karen offered a tight smile and said we were standardizing all front lawns to maintain property values. We didn't realize it was special needs related. The room went silent. My wife swallowed the lump in her throat. It's not a special needs thing, she said. It was just her garden. Karen's reply. Well, I'm sure she can plant another one, this time in the backyard where it won't be a visual distraction. Still, we pushed forward. We told ourselves that people didn't mean harm. They just didn't understand. We invited neighbors over for barbecues. We helped organize a fundraiser for the local shelter. We even hosted a book reading event for kids in the community, with Lily handing out bookmarks she made herself. But Karen never came. Not once. Her name was on every flyer, her approval stamped on every poster, but she never showed. And yet, she was everywhere. Every mailbox warning, every fine notice, every silent disapproval that came cloaked in polite HOA language. One afternoon, Lily came home quiet. Not tired, quiet. She stared at the ceiling during dinner, barely touched her food. Finally, she said, "Am I a problem?" My wife and I froze. "No, sweetheart, why would you say that?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Mrs. Karen told someone I make things complicated." My heart clenched. She shouldn't have heard that. She shouldn't have understood that. But she did. And that night, when we tucked her into bed and kissed her forehead, my wife and I sat in the hallway in silence, holding each other's hands, wondering if we'd made a terrible mistake. But we didn't want to give up. We'd spent years fighting for Lily to be seen, heard, and treated with dignity. We weren't about to let passive-aggressive HOA notes or one woman's fake smile erase the progress we'd made. Lily had been through so much already: surgeries, therapies, stares from strangers. She had fought her way to laughter and books and confidence. We were determined to shield her from as much of the world's cruelty as we could. And for a while, we believed we could. We believed that love, presence, and resilience would be enough. That if we just gave it time, this community would see the light that Lily was and embrace her. But then came that day in the lunchroom. The day Karen crossed the line from passive to predatory. The day she took everything we were building and crushed it with one vile, deliberate act. And it wasn't just about the sandwich or the juice box. It was about what it represented, that our child's dignity was disposable, that our love wasn't enough to protect her, that no matter how kind we were, how involved we stayed, how much we contributed, there were people like Karen who would always see our daughter not as a child, but as a nuisance. Looking back now, I realize that the signs were always there. In the empty smiles, the silent stares, the clipped compliments. But we were so desperate for peace that we mistook quiet hostility for politeness. And by the time we realized the truth, it was already too late. Our daughter's world had been violated. Not by a stranger, but by the very community we had trusted to care for her. And so began the unraveling, the quiet rage, the long nights of planning, the fight not just for Lily, but for every child who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong. Because if they could throw her lunch in the trash with a laugh, then what else were they willing to destroy with a smile? At first, it was easy to dismiss the little things. We chalked them up to miscommunication or just harmless neighborhood quirks. When we received our first HOA courtesy reminder, we even laughed about it. It was an envelope taped to our front door, neatly typed, politely worded, "Please ensure the wheelchair ramp does not extend beyond your front steps. It must remain visually consistent with neighborhood architecture." There was no signature, just the Willow Creek HOA logo at the bottom. We hadn't even lived there a full month. The ramp wasn't extravagant, just a low-slope portable one, custom-fitted, so Lily could get in and out of the house independently. We thought we were being considerate, but apparently independence had an aesthetic limit. My wife took the letter inside, read it twice, and set it down without a word. We didn't want trouble, so we called the number listed and left a message asking for clarification. No one ever called back. The next day, a neighbor, a kind man named Greg, who lived 3 doors down, came over with a box of donuts and quietly said, "Just so you know, Karen doesn't like things that stand out." When I asked him what that meant, he shrugged, eyes darting nervously toward the sidewalk, and muttered, "She's just very particular." We started to notice the way people paused when we rolled Lily down the street. Not rude, just hesitant. The kind of hesitation you feel when someone's unsure how to act but doesn't want to appear uncomfortable. Some smiled politely, others looked quickly away. A few brave kids asked Lily questions about her chair. Is it electric? Can it go fast? And she answered with patient joy. She loved explaining things. But more and more, we noticed the parents quietly pulling their children back, whispering, "Come on," or "Don't stare," and walking away. Lily began asking why people didn't want to talk to her. We told her they just didn't know how yet, that they needed time, but deep down, we felt the slow burn of rejection taking root. The next letter came 2 weeks later. Please refrain from leaving children's medical equipment on the front porch. All personal items must be stored out of sight when not in use. It was about Lily's custom chair cushion. She had taken it off to dry after a rainy afternoon and left it on the porch railing. One cushion, drying, not abandoned, not junk, and yet it somehow violated the visual harmony of the neighborhood. Karen hadn't even bothered to talk to us face to face, just sent another anonymous note, another polite slap. I remember standing outside that night, looking up and down the street and seeing bikes, strollers, shoes, even a deflated pool float in someone's front yard, untouched, unbothered. Ours was the only item singled out. We brought it in, of course, but something shifted in me that day. A quiet rage, a gnawing feeling that said, they don't want her here. Then came the whispering. At first, it was subtle, two women across the street lowering their voices as we approached, then changing the subject with wide, awkward smiles. A group of kids playing tag suddenly stopping as Lily rolled by, not out of cruelty, but as if waiting for her to pass like she was traffic. One mother asked if we'd consider sending Lily to the special school just up the highway. They have great programs for her kind of situation. I remember my wife gripping my hand under the table, so hard it left marks. She's doing just fine at Willow Creek Elementary, she said, smiling tightly. But the message was clear. Lily made them uncomfortable. Her presence forced them to confront something imperfect in their perfect world. It wasn't just about her, though. It was about us, the way Karen subtly made sure we were never quite in the circle. At HOA meetings, she'd ask about our property like we were newcomers, even after months. "How are you settling in?" she'd say with a fixed smile, then move on without waiting for an answer. When neighborhood events were planned, block parties, wine nights, lawn competitions, we either didn't receive the invite or were told they assumed we couldn't attend. Once, my wife offered to bring cupcakes to a school fundraiser, and the organizer, a woman named Trish, who always hovered near Karen, politely said, "Oh, we already have someone doing baked goods, but thank you." The next day, we saw the sign-up sheet. Cupcakes were still open. One incident, though, stands out more than the rest. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, and Lily was playing in the driveway with sidewalk chalk. She loved drawing flowers and stars, shapes that made her feel connected to nature. Her hands were covered in pastel dust, her hair tied up in a pink scrunchie, her laughter echoing through the cul-de-sac. A few kids from down the block walked by, curious. One of them, a little girl named Zoe, asked to join her. Lily beamed and handed her a piece of chalk. For 5 minutes, it was perfect. And then Karen appeared, stepping out of her house like she was summoned by joy. She walked briskly toward us, heels clicking, lips tight. "Hi," she said sharply. "I just wanted to mention that sidewalk chalk can be really hard to clean, and it can lower the curb appeal if it's not washed off promptly." I looked at her, stunned. The drawings weren't even beyond our driveway. "It's washable," I said. "She's just playing." Karen smiled stiffly. "Of course, just something to be aware of. We all want to maintain a certain standard around here." I stood there as she turned and walked away, a sick feeling curling in my stomach. I looked down at Lily's drawing, a wobbly but beautiful sunflower right in front of our garage. She was watching me, eyes searching my face for a reaction. I knelt down, picked up a piece of blue chalk, and added a sky to her flower. She smiled. But that night after she went to bed, I cried in the garage. Not from sadness, from frustration. From knowing that every small, coded gesture, every forced smile, every so-called friendly reminder was just another way to say, "You're not really welcome here." That's what microaggressions do. They don't scream. They whisper. They don't shove you out. They nudge you toward the edge until you begin to wonder if maybe you're the problem. They wear the mask of civility, but underneath, they're corrosive. They chip away at belonging. And slowly, they turned Willow Creek, the dream we had hoped for, into a performance we were forced to survive. Karen never once yelled. She never used slurs. She never said anything that could get her in real trouble. But she didn't have to. She weaponized her politeness like a blade, clean, sharp, and always deniable. And the neighbors? They stood by, not because they agreed with her, but because silence was easier, because saying something meant risking their comfort, because confronting the polite cruelty of the HOA president meant choosing sides. And no one wanted to be on the side of the family with the disabled kid who caused drama. But we weren't looking for drama. We were just looking for decency. And what we got instead was 1,000 paper cuts and the slow, awful realization that maybe the community we dreamed of was never really meant for people like us. That morning had started with such sweetness. I remember waking up a little earlier than usual to prepare Lily's lunch myself, something I rarely did during the week because my wife usually handled mornings while I juggled early meetings. But that day, something told me to do it. Maybe it was the way Lily had bounced into the kitchen the night before, telling me she wanted to share her apple slices with her new friend in class. Maybe it was the way she had placed her favorite heart-shaped sandwich cutter on the counter with a hopeful grin. I took my time that morning, carefully making her grilled cheese just the way she liked it, lightly toasted with a bit of honey drizzled on the inside edges for that surprise sweetness. I sliced the apple into thin smiles and packed her little note. "You are brave. You are kind. You are so loved." I tucked it into the small pocket of her purple lunchbox and zipped it shut. Lily rolled into the kitchen right on time, dressed in her floral shirt and wearing her pink beaded bracelet, the one she said made her feel extra sparkly. She looked up at me with those wide, eager eyes, and I kissed her forehead and said, "Today's gonna be a good day, sweetheart." She smiled and nodded. She always believed me, and I meant it. If only I had known what was waiting for her. The lunchroom was a place that had once made Lily nervous. It was noisy and overwhelming at first, but over time, she had grown used to the rhythm of it, the metallic clatter of trays, the thrum of voices, the beep of the microwave behind the counter. She liked sitting near the window, where she could feel the sunlight on her face and watch the trees sway while she ate. That day was no different. She wheeled herself to her usual spot, lunchbox perched on her lap, excited to eat and maybe even share a story or two with Zoe, the one girl who had recently started talking to her more. But before she could even unzip her lunchbox, the room shifted. The light dimmed, not literally but emotionally, as Karen stepped into the cafeteria like she owned the building. She wasn't a teacher. She wasn't on duty. But somehow, she always found a way to insert herself into spaces she had no business occupying. Karen strutted in, flanked by two other mothers who often followed her around like satellites. They weren't subtle. Their laughter was sharp, too loud, like they wanted to make sure everyone knew they were there. Karen's heels clicked on the tile like gunshots, each step punctuated with the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. She scanned the room like a predator. And then she saw Lily. My daughter had just opened her lunchbox, unfolding the note with her careful fingers, a small blush of joy spreading across her cheeks. That note meant everything to her. Those simple affirmations were her armor in a world that too often misunderstood her. Karen walked right up to her, stopped a foot away, and said, loud enough for multiple tables to hear, Well, looks like someone thinks they're getting 5-star service today." Lily looked up, startled. She didn't understand at first. She smiled politely and tried to sign something, a small wave, maybe a thank you, but Karen didn't wait. She didn't ask. She didn't acknowledge. She reached down, plucked the sandwich from the open box, held it up like it was contaminated, and said, "What even is this? Some soggy pity meal?" The women beside her laughed, one covering her mouth, the other shaking her head in mock dismay. Lily froze, her hands still hovering over the lunchbox like she could protect what was left. Karen grabbed the juice box next, turned it over in her hand like it offended her, and then, with deliberate slowness, took the entire lunch, sandwich, apple slices, juice box, even the napkin with little doodles on it, and walked over to the nearest trash bin. No one stopped her. Not the lunch monitor standing near the milk station. Not the teacher on duty who glanced up and then quickly looked away. Not the aide who was supposed to be helping Lily that day, but was chatting at the back of the room with another staff member. Karen reached the trash bin, looked back once, her eyes locking with Lily's, and with a smirk dumped the entire lunch into the garbage. She didn't break eye contact. She didn't flinch. She turned back toward her entourage and said, "Some people need to learn where their place is before laughing and walking out as if she'd done something noble." Lily sat frozen. Her hands still hovered in the air like she was holding invisible food. Her lips trembled, her eyes flicked around the room, hoping, desperate, for someone to say something, to tell her this wasn't okay, to come and give her back what had been stolen. But the room remained silent. A few kids whispered. One boy looked away, ashamed. A girl at the next table picked up her spoon and pretended nothing had happened. Zoe didn't even make eye contact. She just packed up her tray and walked out. And Lily? She did what she'd learned to do in situations like this. She disappeared into herself. Her chin dropped, her shoulders curled inward, and she stared at the empty table in front of her, fighting not to cry. She didn't want to give them that satisfaction. I didn't find out until hours later. The school didn't call. No one from the staff informed us. Lily came home quieter than usual, her lunchbox still zipped shut. She wouldn't speak. She wouldn't even sign. She just sat on the couch, rocking slightly, eyes unfocused. My wife opened the lunchbox, confused, until she saw it was empty. No crumbs, no napkin, nothing. Just a note, now crumpled and damp from juice. "Lily," she whispered, "what happened?" It took nearly an hour before she signed it out, piece by piece, slow and trembling. My wife called me at work, crying so hard I couldn't understand her at first. When she finally told me, something inside me went still. Not the kind of still that comes with peace, the kind that comes before a storm. The next day, I marched into the school. I demanded to speak to the principal, the teacher, the lunchroom staff, anyone. I asked to see the footage from the security camera in the cafeteria. At first, they refused. They said it was against protocol. They said there had been no incident reported. I said I'd get my lawyer. That changed things. We watched the footage together in a silent, cramped office. I saw Karen. I saw the smirk. I saw the laughter. And I saw my daughter, my brave, tender, radiant daughter, humiliated while adults looked on and did nothing. The silence of the staff in that moment echoed louder than Karen's voice. It was the kind of betrayal that makes your hands shake, the kind that makes you want to tear the walls down. When I confronted the principal, she looked uncomfortable. She said, "We don't usually have parents entering the cafeteria unless they're volunteering." I stared at her. She's not a parent here. She's not even staff. She humiliated a child and no one stopped her. The principal glanced away and mumbled, "Karen's on the HOA. She's influential." I stood there, breath caught in my throat, realizing the truth. They were afraid of her, and their fear had cost my daughter her dignity. That night, Lily refused dinner. She wouldn't come out of her room. She curled into her blanket and faced the wall. And when I kissed her goodnight, she whispered the words I still hear in my sleep. "Am I a problem?" I hugged her so tightly I thought I'd break. "No, baby, you're not the problem. They are." That was the day something inside me shifted forever. No more politeness. No more patience. No more giving people the benefit of the doubt while they quietly destroyed my daughter's spirit. Karen had thrown away a lunch, but what she really tried to trash was Lily's place in the world. And I was never going to let that happen again. This wasn't just a line crossed. It was war. A war for my daughter's right to exist in peace. And I was ready to fight. In the days that followed the incident, I found myself trapped in a whirlwind of meetings, emails, and thinly veiled dismissals that left me more exhausted than furious, though the fury never left. The morning after I watched that footage, I sat across from the school principal, clutching a printed still frame of Karen standing over Lily's lunchbox with her hand extended like a queen offering judgment. I placed it on the desk, not just for evidence, but as a symbol. This happened. A grown woman did this to a disabled child under your roof. The principal glanced at it, then up at me with a practiced look of concern, the kind that comes from years of learning how to look sympathetic without offering accountability. "We understand your concerns, Mr. Walker," she began, carefully choosing every word. "But as of now, there is no formal complaint on file from a faculty member. It's possible your daughter misinterpreted the interaction. Children, especially those with communication challenges, can be sensitive." My fists curled under the desk. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Sensitive? My daughter wasn't throwing tantrums. She had been humiliated publicly, and no one, no teacher, no aide, no lunch monitor had stepped in to help. When I reminded them of their legal obligation to protect students with disabilities, the room shifted. The counselor chimed in then, saying things like, "Perhaps this is best resolved through a restorative circle," and "maybe Lily would benefit from emotional processing sessions with our special education liaison." My wife, sitting beside me, looked hollow. Her face was blank, but I could feel her fury vibrating beneath her skin. We weren't here to talk about our daughter's ability to process trauma. We were here to talk about the woman who caused it. And that's when the deflections began. The real ones. The school, eager to avoid scandal, pointed fingers at the HOA. "Karen isn't employed by the district," they reminded us. "She's a private resident, and any disciplinary action would be outside our jurisdiction." I asked how she got access to the cafeteria, and they shrugged. "She's here so often, most staff assume she has clearance." When we approached the HOA board, it was the same dance, politeness wrapped around poison. Karen, they said, had been a pillar of the community for over a decade. She had hosted holiday drives, organized fundraisers, and as one board member put it, done more for this neighborhood than anyone else. They hinted that maybe this had all been a misunderstanding. Karen would never intentionally hurt a child, one of them said, shaking his head with theatrical sadness. "She's a little blunt, sure, but she has a good heart." A good heart. That phrase bounced around my skull, like a curse. What kind of heart casually strips a child of dignity and laughs about it? We filed a formal complaint with the school district, attaching the video footage and a written statement. But weeks went by with no word. When we called for updates, we were told the matter was under internal review and that we should avoid discussing the case with other parents to protect student confidentiality. In the meantime, Karen continued to walk the sidewalks like nothing had happened. She smiled at neighbors, posted pictures of community flowers on the HOA Facebook page, and even had the audacity to share a quote about kindness on her story. It felt surreal, like we were living in a horror movie where the villain blends in perfectly while everyone else gaslights the victim. And the worst part? Lily saw all of it. Every time we passed Karen's house on the way to school, her hands tightened on the armrests of her wheelchair. She no longer waved to neighbors. She no longer asked to draw chalk on the sidewalk. She didn't wear her pink bracelet anymore. She stopped bringing her favorite toys to school, afraid they'd be taken or mocked. And she didn't ask for grilled cheese sandwiches, not once. That broke me in a way I can't explain. Emotionally, she began to regress. The bright chatter she once shared over dinner dimmed. She stopped signing certain words altogether. Her therapist said it was trauma, direct, targeted, and still unresolved. And there was no space for her to heal because the adults responsible refused to acknowledge the wound. At home, we tried to be strong. We tried to create routines, offer comfort, keep things stable. But the tension began to erode us. My wife and I started arguing over small things, laundry left in the dryer, forgotten grocery items, who would attend the next meeting with the school. We weren't fighting each other, We were fighting exhaustion. Anger with nowhere to go curdles into resentment, and even love starts to fray at the edges. I missed 2 days of work the week after the incident, and my supervisor warned me about slipping on deadlines. I wanted to scream, "My child is breaking and you're worried about quarterly reports?" And through it all, Karen's narrative began to spread. Whispers that Lily was fragile, that we were difficult, that maybe we were using her disability for attention. A neighbor stopped inviting us to the neighborhood potlucks. Another crossed the street to avoid us during her morning jog. The people who once smiled with muffins and small talk now offered only tight nods and quick glances. We had become those neighbors, the ones wrapped in drama, the ones who made everything about disability. But it wasn't about disability. It was about decency. And somewhere between the school's silence, the HOA's protectiveness, and the neighbors' indifference, I realized the truth. This wasn't just a failure of policy. It was a failure of community. Everyone wanted to stay comfortable. No one wanted to rock the boat. But what they didn't realize was the boat had already sunk, and my daughter was left floating alone in the wreckage. Every system that was supposed to protect her had turned the other way. Every adult who should have spoken up had chosen silence. And every day that passed without accountability sent her a louder message: you don't matter. But I wasn't going to let that be the final message. Not for her. Not for us. Not for any child who had ever been made to feel less than. If they thought we'd shrink into the shadows, they were wrong. If they thought they could deflect, delay, or diminish us, they were mistaken. The blame game had begun, but I wasn't playing to win. I was playing to expose, because the truth had already happened. And now it was time for everyone else to see it too. We thought the truth would wake people up, that the footage, the cruelty, the unbearable stillness in Lily's face would jolt our community into outrage, or at least into compassion. But we were wrong. The truth didn't bring people together, it tore them apart. As soon as word got out that we had filed complaints, meetings were held, and that we were demanding accountability, the neighborhood began to split down invisible lines. Not everyone picked a side out loud. Most didn't say anything at all. But silence is a choice, and in Willow Creek, that silence quickly became the loudest response we received. A few brave neighbors sent quiet texts. "We're so sorry about what happened to Lily. We support you, even if we can't say it publicly." One family even dropped off flowers on our doorstep anonymously, but they never rang the bell. No one came over anymore. No one invited Lily for playdates. Kids who used to wave from across the street now avoided eye contact entirely. Even Zoe, the sweet girl from down the block who once played chalk games with Lily, started pretending she didn't know her at school. We later found out her mother had told her to stay out of it. Stay out of what? Defending a disabled child from public humiliation? Then came the online posts. At first, they were subtle comments in the community Facebook group about certain families making everything about themselves. Then, screenshots from private Nextdoor threads began to surface. Someone leaked them to us, an anonymous email from a burner account with no message, just images. And there it was, Karen's name over and over, surrounded by carefully worded sarcasm and weaponized civility. Some people are just too sensitive. One post read, "That child gets more special treatment than anyone else in this neighborhood. Maybe they should be more grateful." Another said, "They moved here knowing this was an HOA. If they don't like the rules, they're free to go." One user, hiding behind a cartoon avatar, said outright, "This isn't a rehab center. It's a community. Enough is enough." My hands trembled reading it. My wife sat beside me, speechless, her face draining of color. We weren't just being ignored, we were being targeted, not for doing something wrong, but for daring to ask for decency. And then, as if to twist the knife deeper, the HOA sent us a formal notice, a covenant violation warning. It stated that we had breached community decorum by engaging in defamatory behavior against a sitting HOA board member, and that our aggressive complaints could endanger neighborhood unity. I read the letter 3 times, trying to comprehend the absurdity. We were being reprimanded for calling out a grown woman who threw a disabled child's lunch in the trash. I called the number listed on the letter and demanded a meeting. At the meeting, Karen didn't even look at me. She sat 3 chairs away, flipping through the HOA bylaws like this was just another task on her checklist. When I raised my voice, finally, angrily after holding back for so long, I was told to remain civil or leave the meeting. I walked out that day feeling like I had entered an upside-down world where the victim becomes the villain and cruelty is covered by layers of bureaucratic gloss. Soon after, anonymous notes began appearing in our mailbox. No return address, no signature. One said, "Maybe your daughter wouldn't have so many problems if you weren't always looking for attention." Another said, "Stop making our neighborhood toxic." We reported it to the HOA, no response. We reported it to the police, but without a suspect, they could do nothing. Meanwhile, Lily had started asking to be homeschooled. She said she didn't like the way other kids looked at her now, that they whispered, that they laughed sometimes. She couldn't explain the words, but she knew the tone. We had tried so hard to shield her from it all, but she was too smart, too sensitive, too aware. She could feel the shift in energy around us, even if she didn't know how to name it. She stopped sleeping through the night. She had nightmares where people threw her things away and laughed at her while she cried. She started having accidents again. The shame in her face when she told us made my chest ache. There were still a few neighbors who showed support, but it was always in the shadows. One mom texted me after a board meeting and said, "Just so you know, a lot of us believe you. We're just scared to say anything." Scared of what? Of Karen? Of being ostracized by a community that pretended to be inclusive until it was inconvenient? The truth was, Karen wasn't just one woman. She was the voice of every person in Willow Creek who wanted order over empathy, silence over justice, and image over integrity. Her cruelty didn't survive in isolation. It was protected, enabled, justified, because it was easier than confronting the discomfort of standing up to her. And the longer this dragged on, the more we realized we weren't just fighting Karen. We were fighting a culture that punishes those who speak up more than those who do harm. In a neighborhood of over 100 families, only 2 offered to publicly support us when we considered going the press. The rest stayed quiet, clinging to their comfort like a lifeline. But the question that kept ringing in my head was simple. Whose side are you on? Not just in public, but when no one's looking. When a child is humiliated, when a family is isolated, when the powerful abuse the weak. What do? Stay neutral? That's not neutrality. That's complicity. And it became clear that in Willow Creek, neutrality was the norm. And so, we stopped expecting justice from them. We stopped waiting for the apology that would never come. We stopped hoping that Karen would finally face consequences from a community that had already decided protecting its reputation was more important than protecting a little girl's dignity. But we didn't stop fighting, because even if the neighborhood wanted to stay divided, we knew which side we were on. The side of the child whose smile was stolen. The side of the family who refused to be silenced. The side of truth, no matter how uncomfortable it made everyone else. There comes a point when silence becomes a weapon, when the absence of justice echoes louder than any insult. And that's when we decided to fight back, not with rage or slander, but with the one thing people like Karen couldn't manipulate: proof. The system had failed Lily. The school had tried to brush the incident under the rug, the HOA had chosen allegiance over accountability, and the community had slipped into a cowardly quiet. But we were done hoping for decency. We hired a lawyer, a woman named Danny Marshall, who didn't flinch when we showed her the footage or described the weeks of passive retaliation we'd endured. She had a calm fury about her, the kind that didn't scream but dismantled with precision. "They're betting on you giving up," she said, flipping through our documents. "Let's make sure that bet costs them dearly." Danny walked us through every legal channel we had: ADA violations, civil harassment statutes, educational neglect, emotional abuse. We filed official complaints with the Department of Education, the Office for Civil Rights, and even the state's Human Rights Commission. But legal paperwork wasn't enough. We needed more. We needed patterns. So we began documenting everything, every email from the HOA, every note in the mailbox, every absence of action from the school. My wife created a binder color-coded and labeled where she kept screenshots of social media posts, correspondence, and our own detailed notes. But then, something unexpected happened. One late evening, a knock came at our door, not loud but hesitant. It was Greg, our neighbor 3 houses down. He looked uneasy, holding something in his hands, a USB drive. "I don't want any trouble," he said quickly, "but I thought you should see this." My Ring cam caught the whole thing. He handed it over, nodded once, and left without another word. We plugged it in. There it was, clearer than the school's hallway footage, more damning than we expected. Karen's face, her hand reaching down, her words, not just dismissive but dripping with cruelty. "Let's see how special you feel after this." And then the laughter. Real, undeniable evidence that this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was malice. When Danny saw the footage, she leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing. "This," she said, "is gold. Let's build the case around this." Encouraged by the breakthrough, I reached out quietly to a few other parents. Most were skittish, but one, an overwhelmed single mom named Dana, confided something chilling. She told me her autistic son had been redirected from a community Halloween event the year before after Karen told the volunteers his costume was too scary for younger kids. She hadn't complained at the time. She didn't want to rock the boat. But now, I wish I had said something. Maybe this wouldn't have happened to your daughter. Another neighbor, whose husband worked in the HOA's maintenance team, anonymously forwarded an internal email thread. And in that thread, we found it. Karen, replying to a board member's comment about sensitive families, had written, "Some of these parents need to learn boundaries. We're not a therapy center, and it's time someone teaches them that." Then another board member replied, "Glad you handled it. They'll think twice next time." My hands shook as I read it. This wasn't just a random act. It was a targeted effort, coordinated, approved, mocked behind closed doors. We brought all of this to the school district's lawyer. At first, they were defensive, cautious, measured in their tone. But when Danny played the Ring footage and laid out the email thread, their demeanor shifted. What had been a conversation about restorative justice and emotional misunderstandings turned into quiet note-taking and requests for copies. An internal investigation was launched. The principal who had downplayed the incident was placed on temporary leave. The lunchroom aide was quietly reassigned. And for the first time, someone from the district apologized, not a scripted statement, but a real one. Still, no one mentioned Karen. No one dared. So we took the next step, a civil suit. Danny filed the paperwork against the HOA for harassment, discrimination, and failure to provide a safe community environment under the Fair Housing Act. We also filed against Karen personally for emotional abuse, intentional infliction of distress, and community defamation. It was risky, public, exposing, but it was necessary. We knew Karen would weaponize her social capital, spinning the narrative to frame us as attention seekers or manipulators. And she did. Almost immediately, a post appeared in the community Facebook group. Some people don't belong in structured communities. They cry wolf and then sue the farmer. It was obvious who wrote it, but we let her talk. Because now, everything she said became part of the case. We gave interviews to advocacy blogs, to disability rights podcasts, and eventually to a local journalist who had heard whispers of the Willow Creek incident. We didn't name names publicly, but the community knew. And slowly, others began to come forward. Parents who had never felt safe enough to speak out. Teachers who had left the school after being silenced for pushing inclusive practices. A former board member who said he stepped down after Karen overruled a proposal to add wheelchair-accessible seating to the clubhouse patio. One by one, the quiet witnesses became a quiet movement. They emailed Danny. They shared stories, and they validated what we already knew. Karen's cruelty wasn't a one-time slip. It was habitual, strategic, and systemically enabled. By the third month of legal proceedings, the cracks in Karen's facade began to show. Her responses grew more defensive. She changed her social media privacy settings. She stopped smiling in public, and at one board meeting, she didn't even show up. But it wasn't about embarrassing her. It was about making the truth louder than her reputation. Lily deserved that. Every child like her deserved that. Every family who had been made to feel small because they needed more than what normal families needed deserved to know someone fought back. The case isn't over. Lawsuits are slow. Change is slower. But we're not backing down. Because now we're not alone. And Karen? She's no longer untouchable. The community may still be divided, but the wall of silence is cracking. The mask is slipping. And for the first time since that horrible day in the cafeteria, our daughter is smiling again, not because everything is fixed, but because she knows this time her parents refuse to look away. This time, the truth has a voice, and it won't go quiet again. We had already unearthed more than we ever expected: emails, witness accounts, video footage, but nothing prepared us for what came next. It happened almost by accident during one of Danny's deeper dives into public records and archived community reports. She was thorough like that, never satisfied with the surface. One night, she called us past 10 p.m., her voice unusually sharp. "I need you to see this," she said, forwarding us a set of scanned documents and screenshots. At first, we didn't understand what we were looking at: pages from a volunteer background check, redacted report from a school district 2 towns over, and a photo of Karen in a yellow safety vest handing out flyers at what looked like a disability awareness event. "Look closer," Danny urged. We zoomed in on the header. The date was from 3 years ago. The organization's name? Kids of Courage, a local nonprofit that worked with children with neurological and physical disabilities. The kind of organization that should have been sacred ground. But then came the real gut punch: a formal notice stating that Karen had been removed from the program after inappropriate disciplinary behavior and failure to follow inclusion guidelines. We sat in stunned silence as Danny read the rest aloud. Karen had allegedly reprimanded a nonverbal autistic boy for disruptive behavior because he was flapping his hands. When his parents complained, she told them their son needed more discipline and less indulgence. It caused a scandal in the group, and while no criminal charges were filed, the organization asked her not to return. This woman, the self-declared protector of community values, had a history, not just of being controlling, but of targeting disabled children under the guise of order. And no one in Willow Creek knew. Or, if they did, they never said a word. Worse still, she had used that photo, the one from the awareness event, in every HOA election flyer, positioning herself as a compassionate volunteer. We had all seen it. Karen, a heart for the community. That was her tagline. She wore that vest like armor, and no one had ever questioned it. But now, we had proof that her entire image was a lie, a carefully curated mask concealing the pattern beneath. When we brought this to the attention of the district mediator assigned to our case, she went pale. She hadn't known either. We watched her flip through the documents, her fingers trembling slightly as she said, "If this is verified, it changes everything." And it did. But the twist didn't end there. Because once the illusion cracked, more secrets spilled out. One afternoon, as we were reviewing old footage with Danny, we noticed a particular boy in the background of the cafeteria, one who always seemed to be near Lily. Not speaking to her, not friendly, just near, always watching. In one clip, you could see him whispering to another student and then pointing at Lily, grinning. In another, he accidentally bumped into her chair from behind with his tray. Nothing that screamed abuse, but enough to raise concern. "Who is that kid?" I asked. Danny paused the video, zoomed in, and said quietly, "I'll find out." 2 days later, she returned with a folder and a name: Cameron Barnes, Karen's son. It made too much sense. The subtle harassment, the passive silence from the staff, the way no one dared question Karen's access to the school, her child was inside. He wasn't just a student. He was a conduit, an extension of her reach. According to student reports, Cameron had a reputation for being entitled, untouchable, and mean when no one's looking. One former student aide told Danny that Cameron was known to mimic disabled students behind their backs. Another said he once told a classmate, My mom says that girls just pretending to need a wheelchair. Our stomachs turned. Not only had Karen abused her influence, she had seemingly passed her cruelty down like a family heirloom. And suddenly, Lily's recent behavior made even more sense. Her reluctance to attend school, the way she flinched when certain kids approached, the fear she couldn't name, it wasn't just about the lunchroom. It was ongoing, subtle, sustained. We filed an additional complaint. The district opened a review into Cameron's conduct. But even then, the whispers began. Some parents accused us of attacking a child. Others said we were digging for dirt to stay relevant. Karen, for her part, remained silent. She didn't deny the allegations. She didn't try to spin them. She just vanished from public meetings, locked down her social media, and let her allies speak for her. One of them called us vindictive. Another said we were obsessed. But we didn't care anymore. The darkness had already been pulled into the light, and it wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about the system that had protected her, enabled her, and mirrored her cruelty back into the community. The twist wasn't that Karen was cruel. We had always suspected that. The twist was that she had worn the costume of kindness so convincingly, so publicly, that even we had once believed it. And behind that mask, she had been quietly harming vulnerable children, not just with actions, but with culture, with a coldness passed down through silence, inherited by her child, and embedded in the very institutions meant to protect ours. She wasn't just the problem. She was a symptom of something bigger. And now that we had uncovered the rot, we weren't going to stop until the whole thing was torn down and rebuilt, with truth, with accountability, and with the voices of children like Lily finally heard and believed. The room was packed tighter than any HOA meeting before. Rows of folding chairs lined the community center hall, and neighbors who rarely attended had shown up in tense anticipation, whispering nervously and clutching printed agendas that this time meant something more than landscaping updates and mailbox maintenance. The air felt electric, like something was about to crack open. Karen sat at the front table, composed but visibly tense, her signature blue blazer sharp against the white wall behind her. Her usual allies sat beside her, lips tight, hands fidgeting, while the rest of the room watched in stiff silence. My wife and I stood near the back, flanked by our attorney, Danny Marshall, and 3 other families who had reached out in recent weeks, parents who, until now, had been too afraid to speak. We weren't there for theater. We were there for truth. When the board chair called the meeting to order, Karen smiled her usual politician smile, but her eyes betrayed her. She knew. She just didn't know how much we had. When it was time for community concerns, I stood. My heart thudded in my chest, not from nerves, but from the sheer weight of the moment. I'd like to present evidence of ongoing harassment, discrimination, and abuse of authority by this HOA board, specifically its president. A few heads turned sharply. Others stiffened. Karen's smile faltered. Danny walked forward and placed a laptop on the table connected to the projector. "Let's begin with the footage," she said. The room dimmed slightly as the video began. There was Karen, clear as day, striding into the school lunchroom, mocking Lily's lunch, grabbing it, and throwing it into the trash with a smirk. The audio echoed off the walls. "Let's see how special you feel after this." You could have heard a pin drop. A gasp rose from someone in the third row. Karen's face went pale. Her hand twitched as if she wanted to shut the laptop, but didn't dare. When the video ended, Danny spoke again. That wasn't a one-time mistake. That was targeted humiliation. And we're just getting started. I stepped forward, holding up a copy of the HOA's internal email, the one where Karen mocked sensitive families and congratulated herself for handling us. I read it aloud, each word slicing through the room like a blade. When I finished, I looked at her. "Is this your idea of leadership?" She didn't answer. I pressed on. "You told my daughter, without a hint of shame, that her presence made the community worse. And now, we know this wasn't your first time doing something like this. We know about Kids of Courage. We know why you were removed." More gasps. Some people whispered. A woman near the back wiped tears from her cheek. Karen finally spoke, voice trembling but defensive. "That's taken out of context. You're twisting things to make me look like a monster. Danny stepped up. No, Karen. You did that all by yourself. What followed was something I didn't expect. Voices. So many voices. Dana, the mother of the autistic boy from a year ago, stood up and spoke through tears about how Karen had told her she was babying her child and discouraged her from bringing him to events. Greg spoke next, apologizing for not saying anything sooner, then confirming he'd seen Karen berating Lily more than once near the park. A former board member confessed that Karen once overruled a vote to install a sensory swing set, calling it a waste of funds. One by one, people stood, some trembling, others angry, some heartbroken, all sharing what they had seen, what they had ignored, what they now realized they should have stopped. The room began to shift. The spell was breaking. Karen sat stiffly, jaw clenched, arms crossed, shrinking in her chair, with every testimony. Her supporters offered no defense, just stared forward, expressionless. My wife leaned into the microphone. You didn't just throw away my daughter's lunch, Karen. You threw away her dignity. And you taught this community that cruelty wrapped in civility would be tolerated. No more. Danny raised a final document, a petition signed by dozens of residents calling for Karen's immediate removal as HOA president and the initiation of a formal investigation into her conduct. The room applauded, not wildly, not theatrically, but in solemn, unanimous agreement. A motion was made, a vote was called, and in front of everyone, neighbors, friends, parents, even her former allies, Karen was voted out. 29 votes in favor, 3 opposed, and just like that, the woman who had ruled this neighborhood through fear, gossip, and manipulation was stripped of her title. She didn't stay to argue. She stood up, gathered her folder, and walked out. No goodbye, no apology, no acknowledgement of the destruction she had caused. Just silence and the sound of her heels retreating down the hall. For a moment, no one moved. Then someone whispered, "Finally." A few people clapped again. Others simply exhaled. The truth had been spoken, heard, and believed, not just by us, but by those who had once chosen to look away. As we stepped out into the night air, Lily stood beside us, holding my hand tightly. She didn't say much, but when I looked down, I saw something in her expression I hadn't seen in weeks. Peace, not because the damage was undone, but because, for once, justice didn't stay silent. And neither did we. We moved 6 weeks after the final vote, not because we were running, but because we were ready for a new beginning, one chosen on our terms. Our new neighborhood isn't perfect. The houses are smaller, the streets a bit more worn in the HOA. Well, there isn't one. Just neighbors who wave without calculation and smile without checking who's watching. Lily adjusted faster than we expected. The first time she rolled into our new backyard, she paused, breathed in the morning air, and looked up at the birds above the fence. "It's quieter here," she signed softly. And she was right. It wasn't just the noise that had been left behind, it was the weight, the fear, the subtle shame that had crept into her spirit after months of being watched, judged, excluded. That was gone now. We saw it in the way she began to draw again. Big, colorful chalk murals that took up the entire driveway. We saw it in the way she started humming while brushing her hair, in the way she asked to bring sandwiches to school again. Her appetite returned. So did her laughter. And slowly, so did ours. I never imagined our story would resonate beyond our street. But the more we told it through blogs, community talks, and disability advocacy panels, the more we realized how many families had lived through the same pain. Emails poured in from strangers thanking us for speaking out, for refusing to stay silent. Some had children with visible disabilities. Others had kids struggling in quiet ways no one ever noticed until someone like Karen gave them a reason to retreat. My wife began volunteering with a nonprofit that educates HOA boards on disability rights and inclusive design. I helped start a small group for parents navigating community hostility and isolation. We called it Louder Than Silence. And Lily? She became our brightest voice. Last month, she stood at a local library's children's event and signed her story while another little girl translated aloud beside her. When it was over, the applause wasn't for us. It was for her. for her strength, her grace, her light that not even cruelty could dim. People sometimes ask if we're angry, if we'd go back and do things differently. The truth is, yes, we're angry. We probably always will be, because no child should ever be made to feel like a burden for simply existing. But we also know this. Karen didn't win. She didn't silence us. She didn't break Lily. If anything, she gave our daughter something unexpected, a platform, a purpose, a voice, one that can't be taken away, laughed at, or thrown in the trash. It rises steady and soft in every child who now knows they are not alone, in every parent who refuses to look away, in every neighbor who chooses courage over comfort, and in our home it sings daily, quietly, proudly, reminding us that justice is not just about punishment. It's about restoration, about making space for joy again. Karen was once the loudest voice in our lives. Now, she's just a memory, a warning, maybe, but no longer a threat. What remains is the lesson. Silence enables cruelty, but truth, once spoken, cannot be unheard. And our truth? It gave our daughter her voice back, and she's never letting it go again. Stories like ours aren't rare. They're just rarely spoken aloud. All across America, families like mine are pushed into silence, made to feel like outsiders simply for standing up for their children. But enough is enough. If you've ever witnessed injustice in your own neighborhood, if you've ever felt powerless against people who misuse authority, stand with us. Share this story. Speak up. And most importantly, know you are not alone. Subscribe to HOA Denied Access, where we uncover the truth behind gated smiles and manicured cruelty. Here, we give voice to those who've been shut out, dismissed, or pushed aside, because no child should ever be humiliated for being different. No family should ever be isolated for demanding respect. The silence ends now, and change begins with you. Stand with us. Speak with us. Fight with us. This is our community too.